In the 60s, having one for the road wasn't just a saying, it was a practice. A man could finish his beer at the bar, toss a friendly wave, and drive off without a second thought. If the police pulled you over, chances were you got a warning and a smile instead of handcuffs. Different times, different rules, and far looser roads. Everyone's name, address, and number sat right there in the phone book, stacked thick as bricks in every home. You could flip to a neighbor, a teacher, even a local doctor without hesitation. Some celebrities managed to stay unlisted, but most folks you knew were in plain print. Privacy wasn't a worry. It was expected that people could find you when needed. If you wrote with your left hand in school, chances were the teacher wasn't too happy about it. They'd rap your knuckles with a ruler and insist you switch to your right. The belief was that left-handedness was improper, even unlucky. Kids learned quickly to hide that natural tendency, and many grew up writing awkwardly with the acceptable hand. Many bars in those days wouldn't serve a woman if she walked in alone. The assumption was that she didn't belong there, unless she slipped quietly through a side entrance labeled "For Ladies' Society" saw it as normal, a kind of unwritten rule, and few questioned it out loud. It feels unthinkable today, but that's the way it was then. Trouble with the police didn't always mean paperwork in the 60s. If you were caught doing something foolish, maybe drinking underage or joyriding, the officer might just toss you in the cruiser, drive you home, and let your parents handle it. A stern word on the porch carried more weight than a fine. They figured the family could set things straight. Airlines back then weren't just about service. They were about appearance. Stewardesses were hired under rules that required them to be young, slim, unmarried, and often under a certain age. Their job was as much about glamour as safety, and every smile was part of the show. Seniority mattered little if you didn't fit the picture of perfection. Mothers stretched thin with kids and chores weren't offered counseling or rest, they were offered pills. Doctors called them nerve pills, and they handed them out freely, a prescription for peace and quiet in a noisy house. No one thought twice about it. It was just how society handled the burdens women carried, with medicine instead of true relief. Sports weren't gentle in the 60s. A coach might see you take a hard hit, watch your eyes go a little glassy, then send you right back in after a sniff of smelling salts. "You'll be fine, kid," was the common cure. Concussions weren't part of the vocabulary. Toughness was. You played through it, no matter how wobbly you felt. Autumn carried a special smell in the old neighborhoods, the sweet smoke of burning leaves. Families would rake them into piles at the curb, strike a match, and let them smolder. The smoke drifted from yard to yard, like the whole block shared one big fireplace. Nobody worried about the air or the mess. It was just fall in America. Imagine sitting in a doctor's office in the early 60s. He'd light a cigarette right at the desk, ashtray beside your chart, and puff away while telling you that you were healthy as a horse. The haze was as much a part of the room as the medical posters. Health advice and smoke went hand in hand back then. Rainy days often brought kindness from strangers. If you were a child caught walking home in the downpour, a driver might stop and offer you a lift. You climbed in without hesitation, and parents thanked the driver when you arrived. The thought of danger wasn't the first thing on anyone's mind. It was simply the neighborly thing to do. Running quick errands didn't come with the panic it does today. A mother could leave her baby in the car while she dashed inside the store, windows cracked for air. No one saw it as neglect. Neighbors might even peek through the glass to coo at the child. It was considered ordinary, just another part of daily convenience. Morning homeroom in many towns often started with a Bible verse and a short prayer. It sat right alongside the Pledge of Allegiance, a routine as ordinary as attendance. The classroom grew quiet, heads bowed, and then lessons began. It was simply expected, a reflection of the culture then, before questions of separation of church and state took hold. The ring of the doorbell once meant a salesman ready with a full pitch. He'd step into the living room, lay out a vacuum or an encyclopedia set, and spend half an hour demonstrating. Families listened politely, sometimes even bought. It was part of the rhythm of home life. Strangers welcomed in, carrying promises of a better, shinier tomorrow. People thought nothing of leaving their homes unlocked. Windows were left open for breezes, and car keys often sat right in the ignition, even while you shopped. It wasn't careless, it was trust. Neighbors watched out for each other, and crime seemed far away. Looking back, it feels almost impossible, but to us, it was simply how communities lived day by day. On the hottest summer afternoons, kids would wrench open fire hydrants until water roared into the street. The spray became a neighborhood fountain, soaking children while traffic slowed to creep through the flood. Nobody called it wasteful. It was just a way to cool off. Police might close it later, but for a while the block was alive with laughter. Radio contests could hand you nearly anything back then, including live animals. A caller might win a hamster, a goldfish, or even a rabbit from the local station. Kids begged their parents to dial in, hoping for a new pet. Factories weren't shy about what they pumped into the sky. Black soot rolled from smokestacks, settling on houses, and laundry hung outside. Neighbors grumbled, but also shrugged. It was the smell of jobs. Industry was king, and pollution was a small price for steady paychecks. Few thought of long-term harm. It was simply the cost of modern progress. Teenagers often spent Saturday nights cruising downtown, radios blaring, coolers of beer in plain sight. As long as things didn't get rowdy, local police looked the other way. The sight of a half-empty bottle on a dashboard didn't raise eyebrows. It was just what kids did, the ritual of youth, long before stricter laws came into play. For girls in school, the rules were simple, skirts only. If you showed up in pants even on the coldest day, you risked being sent home. It wasn't just frowned upon, it was enforced. Skirts and dresses were seen as proper, and nobody questioned the standard. Today it feels absurd, but back then it was an unquestioned expectation. A woman in the 60s often needed her husband's signature to get credit at a bank or even a department store. She could earn her own income, but financial independence wasn't easily granted. Marriage tied her access to money, and institutions enforced it. It was so normal then that few questioned it, just one of many quiet limitations women faced. Office life carried its own kind of haze, this one from liquor. Rolling carts with bottles and tumblers rattled down hallways, and 3 martini lunches were as much a part of the day as memos. Workers returned to their desks after, cheeks pink, ties loosened, typewriters clacking. Productivity might have slipped a little, but the culture celebrated it as normal business. Farm kids especially knew the thrill of driving before their time. Tractors, snowmobiles, dirt bikes, all taken out long before licenses. Parents waved as kids steered down fields or across snowy lots. Nobody worried about insurance or accidents. It was seen as teaching responsibility. Kids learned by doing, not by waiting. Today, it might get the sheriff called, but then it was ordinary. A pregnant teacher in the 60s often couldn't stay once she started to show. Administrators would quietly suggest she step aside, telling her to return after the baby. It wasn't scandalous. It was simply the expectation that children shouldn't see a teacher visibly pregnant. It seems absurd now, but then it was treated as a matter of propriety. Marine parks weren't just about shows, they encouraged up-close thrills. Trainers offered dolphin rides, let kids pet sea lions, and even lined up kisses from animals. Audiences clapped, cameras flashed, and no one asked if it was healthy for the animals. It was billed as wholesome fun. These days, it would be protested, but back then, it was considered family-friendly adventure. Babysitting wasn't a job for high schoolers. It was often handed to 12-year-olds. You could watch a whole brood until midnight, paid 50 cents an hour, and all the snacks you could find. Parents didn't worry about maturity or safety. They trusted kids to manage. It gave youngsters a sense of responsibility, and families a cheap night out. Behind many homes stood a little brick incinerator with a short chimney puffing away almost every evening. Families tossed in paper, food scraps, and plastics without thinking twice. Smoke curled into the neighborhood air like it belonged there. Trash collection was limited, so burning it yourself was ordinary. Nobody worried about pollution. It was simply how households kept things tidy. Homemade fireworks were passed around like trading cards. M80s, cherry bombs, and bottle rockets swapped hands behind garages, kids daring each other to light one off. 4th of July wasn't the only occasion. Any warm summer night could spark a display. Adults frowned, but didn't interfere much. Today, it would mean confiscation and calls home, but then it was simple mischief. Picture a college lecture hall filled with smoke. Ashtrays were built right into the armrests, and professors puffed through entire classes. Students lit up too, striking matches as lectures droned on. The air grew hazy until you could barely see the blackboard. It wasn't odd. It was accepted. A classroom could smell more like a tavern than a place of learning. Primetime television was filled with tobacco ads. Smooth voices promised pleasure. Doctors appeared on screen to recommend brands. and jingles stuck in your head for days. Families watching together could recite slogans word for word. Cigarette commercials played during evening news and family shows right until the early 1970s. At the time, nobody questioned it. It was part of American living rooms. Trampolines looked different back then, just a metal frame with springs stretched over a mat, set up in the backyard over packed dirt. No nets, no pads, no rules. You'd bounce until you flew off, then dust yourself off and climb back on. Broken bones weren't uncommon, but parents figured it built toughness. When a thermometer broke, kids often scooped up the liquid mercury and rolled it in their palms. The shiny silver beads fascinated us, and no one rushed to wash their hands. Teachers sometimes even demonstrated how it split and rejoined. Nobody wore gloves or worried about fumes. It was a little bit of magic in science class or on the kitchen floor. Cigarettes were everywhere, airplanes, hospitals, grocery stores, even the teacher's lounge. Ashtrays sat out like candy dishes, filled and emptied throughout the day. A haze hung over workplaces and homes, and nobody thought of banning it. Smoke trailed behind conversations, dinners, and even surgeries. Today it seems outrageous, but then it was simply part of life, woven into every setting imaginable. The want ads in the newspaper were split cleanly in two: help wanted, male, and help wanted, female. Jobs for men included trades and management. Jobs for women often meant secretarial work or teaching. Everyone accepted it as normal. In those days, 5-year-olds often stood right on the front seat of the car, waving at truckers while their dad drove. Seat belts weren't clicked because half the time they weren't even installed. Parents barely thought about it. Children leaned on the dashboard, laughed at passing cars, and rode along as free as birds. Safety was secondary. The ride itself was the joy. Car interiors were built for space, not safety. 7 people might cram across a long bench seat with little ones sitting on laps. No one counted seat belts. Half the time they were buried in the cushions. Trips to church or Sunday drives looked like rolling living rooms. Today, it'd bring gasps. But then, it was just how families traveled together. Brightly colored paint-coated baby cribs, window frames, and toys, much of it made with lead. No one worried when toddlers chewed on the sweet-tasting chips that flaked off. Parents thought nothing of it. Doctors rarely warned, and houses were filled with that heavy pigment. The dangers we know now were invisible then, hidden behind bright, cheerful colors. Hazardous chemicals were stored in the simplest of places: old soda bottles, glass jars, and tin cans tucked on a garage shelf. Gasoline, paint thinner, pesticides, even antifreeze, all poured into reused containers without labels. Kids saw them as harmless. Bright colors made them tempting. Today, it would be a disaster waiting to happen. But back then, it was simply convenience. A common gift for a grade school boy was a BB gun, handed over with nothing more than a wink. A tin of pellets might last a weekend of target practice on cans or fence posts. Parents trusted kids to handle it. Sure, accidents happened, but no one thought of it as dangerous. To many boys, it was freedom in their hands. Doctors in the 1960s had a pill for every problem, even dieting. Pep pills, often amphetamines, were handed out like candy to boost energy or slim waistlines. Housewives joked about them, and athletes used them too. Side effects weren't discussed much. A prescription pad and a handshake were all it took. Today it seems reckless, but then it was considered medical advice. Newspapers didn't guard your privacy, they printed it. Contest winners, school honor rolls, even birthdays were listed with full names and home addresses. Strangers could know exactly where you lived, and nobody saw danger in it. It was considered neighborly, a way to connect people. Looking back, it seems careless, but at the time, it was just part of being public. Household gadgets in the 1960s weren't built with safety foremost. Space heaters, toasters, and hair dryers often had no grounding protection, with cords that sparked if you twisted them. People shrugged and used them anyway. Fire hazards were brushed off as bad luck. Folks valued convenience over caution, and somehow most households managed just fine. It's a wonder how often it all worked. Children's toys looked cheerful, but were anything but safe. All metal trucks had sharp edges, painted with bright lead-based colors. Small parts snapped off and became choking hazards. Nobody warned parents. They were advertised as rugged and long-lasting. Kids carried cuts and bruises as badges of honor. Today, they'd be pulled from shelves instantly, but in the 1960s, they were simply toys. Roadside zoos dotted highways, pulling families in with hand-painted signs. For a small fee, children could pet a chained tiger, pose with a monkey, or feed a bear through bars. Safety was minimal, oversight was none. Parents took snapshots with pride. It was wild entertainment for a Sunday drive. Today it sounds reckless, but then it was just another family outing. Safety wasn't the first thought, it was fun that mattered. Playgrounds in the 1960s weren't built with soft mulch or rubber mats. They were set on bare asphalt with steel monkey bars and towering slides that heated like a griddle in summer. You'd burn your legs on the way down, land hard at the bottom, and go back up again. Bruises and skinned knees were part of the adventure, not avoided. At gas stations, big cars idled inside closed bays while mechanics smoked. Doors pulled shut against the weather. Exhaust filled the air, mingling with tobacco smoke, and no one worried about carbon monoxide. It was just another day's work, tools clanging and radios humming. Mechanics laughed at danger. Fixing cars came first, fresh air came second. Somehow, most of them managed fine. When fights broke out on the playground, it wasn't the police who got involved. The gym teacher or principal stepped in, separated the kids, maybe made them shake hands, and that was that. Parents rarely heard about it, and certainly no one went to court. Discipline was swift, simple, and handled within the schoolyard itself. In the 1960s, most boys carried a pocketknife, and teachers didn't blink. Some even kept one in their desk drawer. It was considered a tool, not a weapon, something a boy ought to have. Whittling sticks at recess or sharpening pencils with a blade was common. Today, it would bring lockdowns, but then it was just part of growing up. Public transit wasn't built for comfort. Buses and commuter rail cars often had no air conditioning, just cracked windows. Smoking was permitted in certain sections, and smoke drifted everywhere. Riders endured sticky heat, rattling windows, and the smell of cigarettes. Nobody complained much. It was part of daily life. Travel wasn't about luxury. It was about getting from point A to point B. Los Angeles in the 1960s was famous not just for palm trees, but for smog so thick it stung your eyes. Weather reports even forecasted haze as if it were natural. Kids played outside anyway, and parents shrugged it off. Factories, cars, and freeways belched away without restriction. Today, it would make headlines. Back then, it was simply another sunny day.